grandfather clock in Wade Penhallow's parlor struck 4 times before Iris Whitfield gave up on sleep. She lay on her brother's lumpy guest room mattress in the dark, staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked, in the blue moonlight slanting through the lace curtains, like the state of Pennsylvania turned on its side. Iris was 69 years old, 3 weeks past her own eviction, and she had reached the part of her life where every shape she looked at long enough began to resemble a map of somewhere she could no longer go home to. She pushed back the patchwork quilt her late mother had stitched in 1971 and swung her bare feet to the cold pine floor. The house was quiet except for the soft tick of the clock and the low groan of the radiator. Wade slept the way he had slept for the 71 years of his life, like a man with a clean conscience and a paid mortgage. Iris envied him that, the way younger sisters envy older brothers their unearned peace. She wrapped a faded mauve wool turtleneck around her shoulders, pulled on her thick wool trousers, and padded down the narrow hallway toward the kitchen, where a single light burned over the stove, because Wade had left it on for her, the way their father used to leave the porch light on for their mother on bingo nights at the Methodist Hall in 1959. She put the kettle on. She did not really want tea. She wanted, more than anything, to wake up in her own bedroom in the white clapboard house on Maple Hill Road that her father had built in 1948 and that her daughter Lauren had sold out from under her 3 months ago without telling her, while Iris was at the cardiologist getting her own blood pressure checked and crying quietly in the waiting room about Ben, who had been dead 2 years and 4 months on the morning she got the call from the lawyer in Atlanta. Lauren had used the power of attorney Iris had signed in 2019 because Ben was beginning to forget his way home from the grocery store. Lauren had used it not for Ben, who never lost his mind, only his heart valve, but for herself, for a gambling debt Iris would not know the size of for another 11 days. The house was gone. The garden Ben had tilled every spring since 1973 was gone. The porch swing where Iris had nursed both her babies was gone, though the new owners promised to leave the swing for her if she could come back in summer to pick it up. Iris had not yet found the strength to drive past the driveway. The kettle began to whistle. Iris poured the water over a single bag of orange peco and stood at the kitchen window watching the February street. Coldwater, Pennsylvania, was the small town her mother's people had come from. The town where Iris had been born in March of 1956, the town she had left at 22 to follow Bennett Whitfield to his postal route in Easton, and the town she had quietly come back to in November, when Wade said the spare room was hers, as long as the Lord let him keep the deed. The snow on the sidewalk outside was old and crusted, gray at the edges where the salt had eaten through. A single light burned in the bakery across the way where Charlie Driscoll's cousin Mary started the bread at 4:30 every morning. The rest of Main Street was dark. Iris carried her mug to the parlor and sat on the davenport with the cup warming her palms. On the coffee table in front of her lay the photo album she had carried out of the Maple Hill house in 2 black trash bags the day the new owner's truck pulled up. She had been allowed to keep the albums, the quilts, 3 boxes of Ben's letters from his postal supervisor years, and her father's old toolbox. Everything else had been auctioned by Lauren's people in October, while Iris was still half believing it was a paperwork mistake. She opened the album to the page she had opened to every night since she had moved into Wade's house. The photograph showed Bennett Whitfield on the steps of Coldwater Presbyterian on March 14, 1976 in a gray suit too big in the shoulders, holding her right hand in both of his, smiling at the camera as if smiling was the easiest thing a man could do. She was 20 years old in the picture, in the cream wool suit her mother had borrowed from her cousin Fay. On her left hand, just visible against the lapel of Ben's jacket, was the wedding ring Ben had bought at Eastman's pawn on Main Street, paying $28 cash that he had saved out of 3 summers of mowing lawns for the Methodists. The ring was thin gold, plain on the outside with one small, very dark blue sapphire set flush into the band. Ben had said the sapphire was the color of her eyes when she was angry with him, which she was, periodically, for the next 47 years. She had sold that ring on November 4, 2008, to Mr. Arthur Eastman, across that same Main Street counter, to help pay the bills from Ben's cardiac bypass at Lehigh Valley. They had taken the second mortgage. They had taken the loan from her brother. They had still been $3,000 short of the surgeon's last invoice, and she had wrapped the ring in a paper towel and walked it down Main Street one Tuesday morning in her good coat and laid it on the green velvet pad in front of Mr. Eastman without saying what it was. He had known. He had been her father's friend. He had counted out $850 in cash from his till, slow and quiet, and he had said, "Iris, this ring will sit in the case for 90 days like the rules say, and after that I will keep it on personal hold. No fee, no interest, until you can come back." She had thanked him. She had walked home. She had told Ben she had taken on 3 extra shifts at the post office. She had never gone back. She closed the album. The mug was cold in her hands. The grandfather clock struck 5. Outside the kitchen window, a single delivery truck creaked past with its headlights on, and Iris realized she had been crying, the way she had been crying every morning for 104 mornings, with the absolute quiet of a woman who had no one left in the house to wake. By 7 o'clock, she was dressed. The wool turtleneck under the long charcoal gray overcoat, the camel cashmere scarf Ben had given her for their 35th anniversary, the worn brown lace-up boots she had owned since 1991. She left a note on the kitchen table for Wade telling him she was walking, and she let herself out the front door into the iron-cold February morning. Main Street in Coldwater had not changed since Iris was a girl. The same 6 blocks of 2-story red brick storefronts, the same green awning over Driscoll's Hardware, the same hand-lettered sign in the bakery window that said "Fresh Kaiser Rolls Thursdays," the same Methodist steeple at the south end, the same Presbyterian steeple at the north, the courthouse square with its Civil War cannon dead center and its leafless oaks shivering in the gray wind. The town had aged with her, lost a few teeth like she had, but kept its shape. Iris walked slowly, her gloved hands deep in the pockets of her overcoat, breathing the cold air in careful sips because her lungs were not what they had been at 50. She walked past the closed barber shop where her father used to take Wade for haircuts in the 1960s. She walked past the dimmed windows of the 5 and Dime that had become a tax preparer's office in 2003. She walked past the doorway where the Western Auto used to be, where her father had bought her first bicycle in 1964. She turned the corner at the corner of Main and Elm and stopped, because directly in front of her, at the dead middle of the next block, was Eastman's pawn. She had not let herself look at the building in 17 years. She had driven past it with her eyes deliberately on the road. She had crossed to the opposite sidewalk when she had to walk this block. Now she stood 30 feet from the front door in the iron February light, and she looked, and she let it hurt. The building was a narrow 2-story brick storefront with a deep-set entry and a single tall front window. Eastman's was painted in gold leaf in a long-vanished sign painter's hand across the upper third of the glass, with the smaller word "pawn" beneath. The window was empty of merchandise. A yellowed paper sign was taped to the inside of the glass at eye height, and Iris drew close enough to read it. Public auction. The print was bold black, set in a cheap typewriter face that Iris recognized from 40 years of Coldwater town notices. Public auction of the premises known as Eastman's Pawn, Main Street, Coldwater, PA. Foreclosure by the county on unpaid property tax. Contents included as personal property of the decedent, Arthur W. Eastman, intestate. Reserve price, $1. Bid day, Tuesday, February 24th, 9 a.m., Coldwater. County Courthouse, winning. Bidder assumes building, contents, and back tax settlement of $4,217. Contact clerk Charlotte Driscoll, extension 12. Iris read the notice 3 times. Mr. Arthur Eastman was dead. She had not known. She had not let herself read the obituaries in the Coldwater Gazette since Ben died, because the small print columns of the dead were a country she did not feel ready to visit yet. She did the arithmetic without meaning to. She had sold the ring in 2008. 18 years had passed. Mr. Eastman had been 68 then. He would have been 86 in October. The shop was shuttered. The contents were unsold. The notice said personal hold items would be included as personal property of the decedent and offered to the winning bidder. A small voice inside her that had been silent for 104 mornings said, very quietly, "The ring is in there." She stood at the window with her face 2 inches from the cold glass for a long time. She heard dimly the bell above the bakery door across the street. She heard more dimly a milk truck downshifting at the corner. She heard her own heartbeat the way she had heard it in the cardiologist's waiting room, slow and stubborn and not yet finished. Tuesday, February 24th. Today was Monday, February 23rd. The auction was in 26 hours. Iris Whitfield, who had not in her life made a decision faster than she could pray over it, turned away from the window of Eastman's pawn and began to walk, with sudden purpose, toward the courthouse. The Coldwater County Courthouse was the same red sandstone building that had stood at the head of the square since 1887, with its broad granite steps and its tall double doors and the brass plaque beside the entry that read, "Cornerstone laid by Whitworth Penhallow, Master Mason. October 1886. Whitworth Penhallow had been Iris's great-grandfather. She had touched the plaque every time she had ever climbed those steps, since she had been 4 years old, and she touched it now with the tip of her gloved finger, and she went inside. The clerk's office was the second door on the right, behind a frosted glass panel that still read in old gold letters, "Clerk of Courts." Charlotte Driscoll, who had been Charlie in school and was 44 years old with 3 children and a husband who drove a propane truck, looked up from her desk when the bell over the door rang, and her face changed in the soft, sorry way that all of Coldwater's faces changed when they saw Iris that winter. "Mrs. Whitfield," Charlie said and stood up. Iris held up one gloved hand to stop the sympathy and said, "Charlie, I want to enter a bid on the Eastman's pawn building." Charlie sat down slowly. She looked at Iris the way she might have looked at her own grandmother walking into the wrong room of the house. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said. "Mrs. Whitfield, are you sure? The reserve is $1, but the back taxes are $42.17 and the building has been closed since October. The roof has a leak over the back room, and the furnace hasn't run since November. We thought it would go to a developer for the lot." Iris said, "I have $4,217 from my husband's life insurance, Charlie. I have held that money for 2 years because I did not know what to do with it. I would like to know what to do with it. Will you let me file the bid?" Charlie Driscoll, who had grown up calling Iris Mrs. Whitfield because Iris had run the postal substation when Charlie was learning to lick stamps, opened the lower drawer of her desk and took out a green folder. She handed Iris a single-page form on county letterhead. "Bidder, application, foreclosure sale, real property, Coldwater County." Iris took off her gloves. She filled in her name in the neat schoolteacher cursive she had been practicing since 1962. She filled in Wade's address as her current residence. She listed Bennett Whitfield, deceased, in the line for spouse. She signed her name on the bottom line, Iris Penhallow Whitfield, with a small, careful loop on the W, and she handed the form back to Charlie with a single, crumpled dollar bill, from the inner pocket of her overcoat that she had carried in that pocket since the day of Ben's funeral, because she had never figured out where else to put it. Charlie took the dollar. She stamped the form with a heavy iron stamp. Received February 23, 2026. She wrote out a paper receipt in her round handwriting and gave it to Iris. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said softly, "the bid opens at 9 tomorrow. If no one else bids over your reserve, the building is yours by noon. You'll need to wire the back taxes to the county account by Friday." Iris said, "Will anyone else bid?" Charlie hesitated, then said, "There was a man from Wilkes Bar who came up last week to look at the lot. He said he might bid $500 to tear it down for parking." Iris said, "Then I will bid 6. She walked out of the courthouse into the late morning cold. The sky had gone from gray to a pale, blanched, hopeful color that was not quite blue. She did not eat lunch. She walked the 4 blocks back to Wade's house, and she sat on the Davenport, and she told her brother what she had done and Wade, who had argued with her about everything since 1960, put down the coffee cup he had been holding and said, "Iris. Iris. Our father loved that building. He said it the way a man says a thing he has been waiting his whole life to be allowed to say." She slept that night for 3 hours, the deepest sleep she had had since November. At 8:45 the next morning, Tuesday, February 24th, 2026, Iris and Wade walked together to the courthouse in their good coats. Charlie Driscoll opened the bidding at 9 sharp in the small wood-paneled hearing room on the second floor. The man from Wilkes Barre did not come. A real estate agent from Allentown bid $400. Iris stood up in the second row, in her charcoal overcoat with the cashmere scarf at her throat, and said in a clear voice that surprised her own ears, $600. The agent looked at her, looked at Charlie, made a small shrug with one shoulder, and said, "No further bid." Charlie banged the small wooden gavel her father had carved her in 1992 and said, "Sold." The property at 217 Main Street, Coldwater, to Iris Penhallow Whitfield for the sum of $600 plus back tax settlement. It was over by 9:14. Wade hugged her in the courthouse hallway and said, "Iris, you bought a pawn shop." Iris said, "Wade, I bought back $28 in 1976. They both began to cry in front of the water fountain, very quietly the way Penhallows had been crying in that courthouse since 1887. Charlie came down the marble stairs at 9:30 with the brass keys to the building wrapped in a clean handkerchief because the original key ring had been varnished onto Mr. Eastman's belt for 40 years and had needed to be cut off at the funeral home. She placed the handkerchief into Iris's bare palm and folded Iris's fingers around it and said, "Mrs. Whitfield, I have to remind you legally that the contents are now your personal property, including all items held on personal hold. There is a ledger behind the counter that lists the holds. I have read enough of it to tell you very softly that you may want to read it first thing." Iris went home. She made a sandwich she could not eat. She put on the same boots, the same overcoat, the same scarf. At 3 in the afternoon, with Wade pretending he was needed at the hardware store, Iris Whitfield walked alone down Main Street in the slanting February light and stopped in front of Eastman's pawn with the brass keys warm in her gloved fist. She fit the larger key into the lower lock. She turned it. The bolt slid back with a heavy iron sound that traveled into the bone of her wrist. She fit the smaller key into the upper lock. She turned it. The door opened toward her with a long, soft sigh, as if a building that had been holding its breath for 17 months was finally allowed to let it out. The smell that met her was the smell of Mr. Arthur Eastman. Burley pipe tobacco, the cherry blend he had bought in tins at the cigar store in Easton. Old leather, the same leather of the armchair he had sat in behind the counter for 42 years. Oil soap and beeswax and the faint, dry mineral smell of a building that had been heated by cast-iron radiators all winter and now was cold. Iris stepped into the doorway, and she breathed it in, and her knees buckled very slightly, and she put her hand flat against the cold door frame to steady herself. Because the smell was 2008, and the smell was her father's funeral in 1989. And the smell was every Saturday morning of her childhood, when her father had brought her here to look at the pocket watches in the case. The shop was exactly as it had been. A long, L-shaped glass counter ran from the front door to the back wall, the glass top fogged with 17 months of undisturbed dust. The wooden shelves behind the counter held cardboard boxes of merchandise with index cards taped to the fronts, each card in spidery old man pencil printing. Guitars, radios, cookware, tools, coin books, razors, instruments. The ceiling fan turned slowly in a thin draft from the back door. Mr. Eastman's oak armchair sat behind the counter with a faded green wool blanket folded over the seat. A brass spittoon sat at the foot of the chair. On the counter beside the cash register lay his last unfinished cup of coffee, the inside of the cup blackened to a thin, papery ring of dried film, and beside the cup, a folded copy of the Coldwater Gazette dated October 19, 2023, with a crossword half completed in his hand. Mr. Eastman had died at the counter 2 mornings after that paper was printed. Iris walked through the shop slowly, past the counter, past the green-shaded banker's lamp, past the framed black-and-white photograph of Mr. Eastman's father taken in 1932, past the cracked leather-bound ledger that lay closed on the counter beside the lamp. She walked toward the back wall, because the back wall was where the lock display case stood, the tall, floor-to-ceiling, glass-fronted oak case where Mr. Eastman had always kept the personal holds. And she knew, with a knowledge she had not known she carried, that she had come to this room for that case. She stopped 6 feet in front of it. The brass lock at the center of its double doors gleamed dully in the slant of late-afternoon light through the front window. Behind the glass, on the second shelf from the top, partly hidden behind a leather-cased pocket watch, was a small dark blue velvet jewelry box. Iris stood there for a long time, her gloved hand pressed flat over her heart, before she had the courage to take the third key from the handkerchief and fit it into the lock. She turned the key. The lock yielded with a small, smooth, cooperative click, the kind of click a thing makes when it has been waiting a long time to be opened by the right hand. The double doors swung outward with the soft creak of dry hinges. The shelves came alive in the air of the room as the still atmosphere inside the case stirred for the first time in years. A whisper of cherry tobacco and oiled wood drifted out and surrounded her. Iris took off her gloves. She set them on top of the glass counter behind her without looking. She raised her bare hands to the second shelf and lifted down the small, dark blue velvet jewelry box. A yellowed paper tag was tied to the box with a length of plain white cotton thread. She turned the tag in the slanting window light. In the spidery pencil printing she had been seeing all afternoon, Mr. Arthur Eastman had written, "Whitfield, personal hold, do not sell, indefinite." Beneath that, in a different ink and a different year, in a darker, firmer hand, "Paid in full, October 14, 2023. Signed, A. Eastman." The handwriting trembled at the final letters. Iris's bare hands began to shake. She lowered herself slowly into Mr. Eastman's oak armchair behind the counter, because her legs would not hold her any longer, and she sat with the velvet box in her open palms and looked at it and let herself feel the 18 years of her own walking past the window in one whole single feeling. All at once, the way grief sometimes finally consents to be felt all at once. Paid in full. She pried the box open with both thumbs. The hinge resisted, then gave. Inside, on faded ivory satin, was the thin gold wedding ring Bennett Whitfield had bought her on March 12, 1976, with $28 of lawn mowing money, with the small deep blue sapphire still set perfectly into the band, with the inside of the gold worn satin smooth at the inner curve from 32 years of her own finger. Her engraving was still there. She knew it was there before she tilted the ring to find it. Ben had paid $8 extra at the time for the jeweler in Easton to engrave 4 small words on the inside of the band. B to I, forever, 1976. She held the ring up to the window light. The 4 words were there. She had not seen them since 2008. Iris did not put the ring on. She did not yet feel that she had the right to. She closed the box around it the way a mother closes a sleeping child's hand around a found bird, and she set the box down on the counter next to her, and she pressed both her trembling palms flat over her eyes and let herself cry for 1 minute, a full, clean minute, the way Penhallow women had been crying in this town since before there had been a town. When the minute was finished, she wiped her cheeks with the back of her wrist and said aloud, to the empty shop, and to Mr. Eastman, and to her father, and to her husband, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." The afternoon light through the front window had begun to deepen toward amber by the time she felt strong enough to stand. She did, slowly, holding the edge of the counter. She walked back to the front of the shop and turned the deadbolt to lock the door, because she was not yet ready to be interrupted, and she came back to the counter, and she lifted down the cracked, leather-bound ledger that Charlie Driscoll had told her to read first. The book was bound in dark brown calfskin, worn pale at the corners. On the front, in faded gold, the letters "Personal Holds" were stamped above the dates, 1968, with no closing year, the way an old man writes a date book intending to live a great deal longer than he turns out to live. Iris carried the ledger to the armchair and sat down and opened it. The first pages were her father's generation. She turned them with a careful finger, reading names she had not heard in 50 years. Peabody, S., pocket watch, held for daughter, 1969. Sherwood, R., violin, held indefinite, 1971. The names of the people who had walked Coldwater's streets when she was a girl, the people who had been buried in Mount Olivet Cemetery while she was raising her own children in Easton. She turned to the W's. She turned to the year 2008. She found her own name at the top of a fresh page in the precise printing of Mr. Eastman's pencil. Whitfield, Iris P., Lady's Gold Ring, Sapphire, engraved B2I Forever, 1976. Sold to house. November 4th, 2008, $850. Held from shelf. February 4th, 2009, per undersigned. No fee, no interest, indefinite. Beneath it, in the same handwriting, every 6 months, was the entry, Hold confirmed A. Eastman, with a date in pencil. The confirmations marched down the page like a man's hand drumming a soft, slow, patient rhythm on a counter. May 2009, November 2009, May 2010, November 2010, all the way to May 2023. And then, beneath the last confirmation, in a different pencil, was an entry she did not at first understand. Redemption initiated April 2, 2023. Payer, Bennett Whitfield. Payee, A. Eastman. Plan, 11. Monthly installments, $100 each beginning, April 2, 2023. Terms, private buyback, notify. Mrs. Whitfield. No, see attached. Iris flipped the page. 11 small rectangles of yellow carbon copy paper had been clipped neatly to the inside back cover of the ledger with a single brass paper clip. She unclipped them and laid them out on the open ledger in her lap, fanned in date order. Each one was a receipt slip from Mr. Eastman's till book, written out in his own careful hand. April 2, 2023, B. Whitfield, $100 deposit, ring redemption. May 2, 2023, B. Whitfield, $100 deposit. June 2, 2023, July 2, 2023, August 2, 2023, September 2, 2023, October 2, 2023. The October 2nd slip was followed by another slip dated October 4th, 2023. Bennett Whitfield, final payment, $100. Ring redemption settled in full. Notation. Per Mr. Whitfield's written instruction of this date, ring to be held in personal hold case until Mrs. Whitfield's 70th birthday, March 14th, 2026. Enclosed letter to be presented with ring on that date, signed A. Eastman. Iris counted the slips with her trembling forefinger. April, May, June, July, August, September, October 2nd, October 4th, 8 slips. There were 11 slips on the ledger. She counted them again. 11. $550 adding up to $1,100 by the end. $1,100 against an $850 redemption price. She turned the ledger to the next page, and she found Mr. Eastman's final entry in handwriting that had grown trembly and old. October 14th, 2023. Whitfield ring settled. Buyback price $850. Paid by B. Whitfield, $1,100. Surplus $250 returned to Mr. Whitfield in cash. Ring shelved in case 2, shelf 2. Letter enclosed in box. Hold until March 14th, 2026 per instruction. E. Bennett Whitfield had died on October 28, 2023, 2 weeks after he had finished paying. Iris closed the ledger. She closed it slowly. She closed it the way a woman closes a book she has been reading aloud to her sleeping husband, soft enough not to wake him. She had not known. In all the months she had sat on the Davenport at 3 a.m. and added up everything she did and did not know about her husband's last summer. She had never once thought to ask why he had been so insistent, in the months before he died, that the small black metal cash box on the top shelf of their bedroom closet was to be left alone until she was ready. She had assumed it held papers. She had carried the box from Maple Hill to Wade's house in November, and she had set it on the floor of the guest room closet, and she had not opened it. She would open it tonight. But first, sitting in Mr. Eastman's chair in the deepening February light, she lifted the velvet box from the counter once more and opened it once more. And this time she touched the small dark blue sapphire with the tip of her bare finger. Very gently, the way a person touches a thing she has been told was gone for almost 20 years and discovers was waiting the whole time. She did not find the letter until she returned to Wade's house that evening. The velvet box had felt heavier than a single thin gold ring had any right to feel. And when she sat on the Davenport with the box in her lap after supper, with Wade in the next room watching the weather, she pried up the small ivory satin pillow that cradled the ring and discovered that the bottom of the box had a second compartment. Beneath the pillow, folded once into a precise rectangle, was a cream-colored envelope of heavy stationery. On the front of the envelope, in Bennett Whitfield's stubborn left-handed slant, the only handwriting Iris had ever loved more than her own father's, were 5 words: "To my wife, Iris Whitfield." Beneath that, in a smaller, gentler hand, "To be given with the ring." Iris held the envelope without opening it for a long time. She had her glasses on. She had a clean handkerchief on her knee. She had the lamp on the side table angled to spill warm light onto her lap. She held the envelope until the paper warmed in her hands, until her breathing slowed, until she felt that Ben was sitting in the wingback chair across from her, the way he had sat there for 10,000 evenings during their marriage. She slid the flap open with the small mother-of-pearl letter knife her grandmother had given her in 1962. There were 4 pages inside, written in fountain pen on heavy cream paper. Bennett Whitfield's hand a little shakier than it had been in 1980, but still the careful slant of a man who had carried mail for 41 years and had loved his alphabet. The letter was dated May 12th, 2023. He had been 5.5 months from death when he wrote it, though he had not yet known how soon. She read it aloud, very softly, because she had read every letter she had ever received from her husband aloud, even when she was the only person in the room, because he had a voice that lived inside his sentences, and she had always preferred to let it speak. "My dearest Iris," the letter began, "I'm writing this in Dr. Pranton's waiting room while you are next door at the bakery getting a cinnamon roll for our drive home, which means I have about 11 minutes of privacy in which to start a thing I have been needing to start for 15 years. I want to tell you that I have known about the ring since 2009. She had to lay the page down on her knee and remove her glasses and wipe her eyes before she could go on. I went to the shop in March of 2009. The letter continued because Arthur Eastman ran into me at the hardware store and stopped me in the nail aisle and told me very quietly, very respectfully, that he was holding a personal item of yours, and he wanted me to know in case anything ever happened to him before you came back for it. I drove home that night, and I sat in our truck in the driveway for 45 minutes before I could come inside. I knew what you had done. I knew why you had done it. I had wondered, in 2008, why you took on 3 extra shifts. I had wondered why your ring finger looked different. I had let myself not ask because I knew and because you had wanted to do it as a gift, and a man does not refuse the gift his wife has decided to give him quietly, but Arthur told me the ring was still there. And Arthur was a good man, and I went home and I said nothing to you because you had not wanted to be thanked for it. Iris's hands trembled on the page. For 15 years, the letter said, I tried to scrape together the money to redeem it. I could not. Postal salary, the children's college, your mother's care, the cardiac bypass that took it in the first place. Every time I got close, something happened. In April of this year, my doctor told me my heart was failing again and I would not see another spring. I sold the old Massey Ferguson tractor for $900. I borrowed $200 from Howard at the post office. I went to Arthur Eastman that same day and we made the plan. 11 payments of $100, which I would pay from the 11 months of my disability checks that we were not yet using because you were still working part-time at the substation. Iris had not known about the disability checks. She had thought he was simply slow at filing. She had not noticed the money was missing because there had been so little money to notice. I have paid Mr. Eastman in 11 installments, the letter continued. He has refused to charge me interest because he says he owed your father a favor from 1962 that he never paid back. I have asked Mr. Eastman to hold the ring until your 70th birthday, March 14, 2026, which is 4 years away as I write this. But the doctor says I will not live to see it, and I wanted you to receive this ring from a man who was kind enough to wait for you, not for me, who should have given it to you again the day after you sold it. Iris's voice broke on the page. She continued in a near whisper. There is a surplus. I overpaid Arthur by $250 because I did not trust the disability office to pay me on time, and I rounded up every month. Arthur has insisted on returning the surplus to me in cash. I have placed it in the small black metal box on the top shelf of our closet, sealed in an envelope with the word pawn written on it. I would like you to use that money for one specific thing, and you may laugh at me for asking, but my heart will be easier wherever I am if you would do it. I would like you to walk back into Eastman's pawn one day, however many years it takes you, and I would like you to ask Mr. Eastman or whoever owns the shop by then if you could buy the small mahogany side table that sits beside his armchair. I have admired that table for 40 years and never said so. I would like you to put that table in our parlor next to my chair, and I would like you to set a small lamp on it. And I would like you to read your books beside that lamp. That is all I want. That is the only request I make of you in this letter, my dearest love, my whole heart, my Iris. P.S. The sapphire is still the color of your eyes when you are angry with me. I have been the luckiest man in the Postal Service of the United States of America ever since March 14, 1976. Ben. Iris held the letter for a long time before she put it down. She did not cry. Some grief is too settled and too earned to cry over. She sat very straight in the Davenport with the 4 cream pages in her lap, and she felt, for the first time in 2 years and 4 months, the full and complete shape of having been loved by a particular man for 47.5 years. She walked to the guest room closet at 9 that night with Wade hovering at the door, pretending he was not. She knelt on the cold floorboards, and she pulled out the small black metal cash box. The lid was secured by a small luggage padlock with a key taped to the underside, the way Ben had always done. She turned the key. She opened the lid. Inside, on top of a stack of canceled checks and old tax returns, was a sealed white envelope with the single word pawn printed across it in Ben's hand. Inside the envelope were $250 in $20 bills and a single $50, fresh from the bank in October of 2023, paper-clipped to a slip of paper that read, in Ben's hand, for the little mahogany table. Wade made her a cup of warm milk with honey. They sat in the parlor, and they did not say much. The grandfather clock struck 10. Iris said, Wade, I am keeping the building. He said, I know. She said, I'm moving into the apartment upstairs. He said, yes, you are. The next morning, Wednesday, February 25th at 10 o'clock, a man Iris had not seen in 20 years rang the bell over the front door of Eastman's pawn. She was in the back room, sweeping, when the bell rang, and she came forward through the long aisle of cardboard boxes with the broom still in her hand. The man who stood inside the door was 51 years old, broad in the shoulders the way his father had been narrow, With his father's same gray eyes and his father's same straight Pennsylvania Dutch nose and a worn brown leather mail satchel over one shoulder that Iris recognized as the satchel Mr. Eastman had carried his accounts in for 40 years. Henry Eastman had been a tall, thin boy who used to come into the post office on his bicycle for stamps in 1985. He had moved to Pittsburgh in 1995. Iris had not seen him since his mother's funeral in 2003. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, taking off his cap. "I'm Henry. Charlie Driscoll told me you bid yesterday. I'm sorry I wasn't at the auction. I have something my father left for whoever bought this building, and I have something he left specifically for you." He set the satchel on the dusty glass counter. From the satchel, he took out a small manila envelope and held it out to Iris. The envelope was labeled in Mr. Eastman's pencil hand. "Keys, upstairs apartment, 217.5 Main Street, Coldwater. Water heater pilot in hallway closet, needs match. Radiators bled last March 2023. Furnace in basement needs new thermocouple. $14, part at Driscoll's Hardware. Apartment furnished. Heat good, roof sound. Henry said he kept the upstairs ready for 30 years. He used to say someone would need it." He took out a second envelope, smaller, with Iris's name on it. He set it on the counter and stepped back. He said, "He left this on his desk the week before he died. He told me, if Mrs. Whitfield ever walks back in, you give her this with the ring. I gave the ring to Charlie because that's where the ring went, with the building. The note is for you." The note inside was a single line, dated October 17, 2023, 11 days before Mr. Eastman died. "Iris. The engraving is still inside. I checked twice. A. Eastman." Iris began to laugh, very softly, and then to cry. And Henry Eastman, who had not seen this woman since he was a boy, very gently put one hand on her shoulder the way his father might have done, and he stood there beside her until she could breathe again. And then he went out to his truck and brought in 4 cardboard boxes of his father's personal effects that he thought she might want for the shop she was about to open. The phone call from Lauren came that Friday at 6 in the evening, the way Lauren's calls always came after the workday in Atlanta was done, and her wine was poured, and her conscience was at its softest. Iris was in the apartment above the shop. She had spent 3 days hauling her clothes up the narrow back stairs, washing the windows, beating the rag rug over the railing in the back alley, lighting the pilot of the water heater with a long kitchen match, the way Henry had shown her. The apartment was 3 small rooms, a parlor with a single tall window over Main Street, a kitchen with a cast-iron stove and a porcelain sink, a bedroom with a wrought iron bed Mr. Eastman had bought from an estate sale in 1971. Iris had carried up her mother's quilt and the 4 cream pages of Ben's letter and the small black metal cash box and the photo album from the Davenport at Wade's, and that was almost everything she now owned. The phone rang on the wall in the kitchen. She answered it because she had not yet learned not to. "Mama," Lauren said. Her voice already had wine in it. "Mama, what are you doing? Uncle Wade said you bought a building. Uncle Wade said you moved out of his guest room. Mama, you are 69 years old. You cannot live above a closed pawn shop in a town that does not have a hospital." Iris listened. Iris had been listening to her daughter for 43 years. She let her daughter talk until her daughter ran out of breath. Then she said very calmly, "Lauren, I am going to ask you one question, and I'm going to ask it once. What did you do with the money from Maple Hill?" There was silence on the line that lasted long enough for the radiator in the kitchen to tick 3 times. "Mama," Lauren said, "Lauren, what did you do with the money?" "Mama, it's complicated." Iris said, "Lauren, your father and I bought that house in 1979 for $61,000 and we paid it off in 2014. The new owners paid $412,000 for it. You sent me a check for $90,000 in November and told me that was what was left after the mortgage. There was no mortgage, Lauren. We paid it off 12 years ago. I would like to know what happened to $322,000. The silence this time was longer. Iris heard her daughter, in Atlanta, set a wine glass down on a table. "I had a problem," Lauren finally said. "I have a problem. I've been seeing a person about it since January." Iris closed her eyes. She leaned her shoulder against the kitchen wall. Beside the calendar Mr. Eastman had hung in 1979 of the Pennsylvania farm scenes by N.C. Wyeth. She said, "Gambling." "Yes." "For how long?" "5 years." "How much?" "I don't know exactly. 300? Maybe more." Iris said, "Are you in treatment?" "Yes, Mama. I am in treatment. I have been since the second week of January. I go 3 times a week. I have a sponsor." Iris said, "And your husband knows, yes?" "He knows." Iris said, "Lauren, I am not going to call you a thief. I am not going to call you anything tonight. I am going to tell you 2 things, and then I am going to go because I have a roast in the oven for my brother. The first thing is that I do not want to see you for 1 year. I do not want a phone call. I do not want a Christmas card. I want 1 year of silence between us so that I can decide what I am willing to do with the rest of my life. The second thing is that I forgive you. I do not know when I will be able to act like I have forgiven you, but I have already done it because I am your mother, and because I held you when you came out of me in the spring of 1982, and because I will not carry hatred for you into my own grave. You will not call me again until February of 2027. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mama," Lauren whispered. Iris hung up the phone. She walked into the parlor of the apartment above the shop, and she sat down in the single oak rocking chair Henry Eastman had brought up the stairs for her that morning. She rocked for 10 minutes without speaking. The light over Main Street had gone amber and then gray. The street lamps clicked on one by one, the iron Coldwater street lamps that had been there since 1928. She walked back down the narrow stairs to the shop. She unlocked the front door. She turned the cardboard sign in the window from closed to open, even though the shop was not yet ready. She walked out into the February cold without her coat. She walked 4 blocks to Wade's house in her wool turtleneck and her trousers and her old brown boots, and when Wade opened the door, she put her arms around her brother and she said, "Wade," I told her. Wade held her on the porch in the cold, and he said, "You good?" She said, "I am good." She walked back to her apartment in the dark, with her brother's old peacoat over her shoulders. For the next 17 days, Iris Whitfield worked on the shop. She did not hurry. She found that she had stopped being a woman who hurried somewhere in the last week of February, around the time she had picked up the brass keys from Charlie Driscoll's hand. She moved through the rooms of Eastman's pawn, the way a slow river moves through a valley. She washed the long glass counter. She polished the brass fittings. She bled the old radiators. She found, in Mr. Eastman's office at the back, his careful index card files of every personal hold his father and grandfather and he had taken in since 1922. She decided that she would not sell those items. She decided that she would do what Mr. Eastman would have done if he had had a few more years and a few more good knees. She decided that the shop would be called Whitfield's Memory Store. It would not be a pawn shop because Iris Whitfield was not in the business of taking things from desperate people. It would be the opposite of a pawn shop. It would be a store where the personal hold items in Mr. Eastman's case would be returned, one at a time, to the families of the people who had pawned them, free of charge, with a written card telling the story of how the item had come to be there and how long it had been kept. Iris would track down the descendants. She would write the letters. She would mail the items in soft tissue paper with a story card and a small printed return address that read 217 Main Street, Coldwater, Pennsylvania. The rest of the shop, the cardboard boxes, the radios, the tools, the cookware, the pocket watches that had no name attached to them, those Iris would slowly display, slowly catalog, slowly resell, at prices that would let her keep the lights on in the apartment above. Mr. Eastman's mahogany side table, the one Ben had loved for 40 years, she carried upstairs herself with Henry's help on the 8th day of March. She set it beside the oak rocking chair in her parlor. She placed a small green-shaded lamp on it. She placed the 4 cream pages of Ben's letter inside the table's single shallow drawer. She read the letter aloud to that lamp every Sunday afternoon, the way some women read scripture. Opening day was Saturday, March 14th, 2026. Her 70th birthday. She had told no one to come. She had only put a small typed notice in the Coldwater Gazette on Wednesday. Whitfield's Memory Store, formerly Eastman's Pawn, opens Saturday, March 14th, 9 a.m. All welcome. No purchase necessary. Coffee and cinnamon rolls provided. Proprietor, Iris Whitfield. She woke that morning at 5, the way she had been waking every morning of her life since 1956. She dressed in the mauve wool turtleneck Ben had given her on her 60th birthday. She pinned her silver-gray hair into the soft wave that had always fallen just below her ears. She walked downstairs to the shop in her stocking feet, and she opened the dark blue velvet box that had been sitting closed on the long glass counter since the afternoon of February 24th. And she slid the thin gold ring with the small deep blue sapphire onto her left ring finger for the first time in 17 years and 4 months. And she said aloud, "Ben, good morning. I'm putting it back on. Happy birthday to me." The gold settled onto her finger as if it had been waiting in a coat pocket. The engraving inside the band sat warm against her skin. B to I, forever, 1976. At 8:45, Wade arrived with a tray of cinnamon rolls Charlie Driscoll's cousin Mary had baked at 4:30 in the morning. At 8:50, Henry Eastman arrived with 2 large urns of coffee borrowed from the Presbyterian Fellowship Hall. At 8:55, Iris turned the cardboard sign in the front window from closed to open. The brass bell over the door rang for the first time on her watch when Charlie Driscoll walked through it at 9 sharp with her husband and her 3 children, carrying a paper sign her oldest daughter had painted in red watercolor that said, "Welcome home, Mrs. Whitfield." The next person through the door was a woman in her 60s named Ada Sherwood, whose father's violin had sat in the back of Mr. Eastman's personal hold case since 1971. Iris had mailed her a letter on Tuesday. Ada had driven up from Lancaster that morning. She walked into the shop and she stopped at the long glass counter and she looked at the small, leather-cased violin Iris had cleaned and set out for her on a square of dark green velvet. And Ada Sherwood, who was not a woman given to public crying, began to cry in front of 40 Coldwater neighbors. Iris came around the counter and put the violin in Ada's arms with a small typed card that read, "Robert W. Sherwood, pawned at Eastman's, 1971 to pay mother's medical bills, intended to redeem, died 1974. Held in Case 1, Shelf 4, by Arthur Eastman, 55 years. Returned with love to his daughter, Ada, by Whitfield's Memory Store, March 14th, 2026. By 10 o'clock, 60 people had come through the door. By 11 o'clock, 90. By noon, the entire town of Coldwater that was still alive had walked the cold Main Street block in their good coats to stand in Iris Whitfield's shop and drink coffee and eat a cinnamon roll and shake the hand of a woman who had decided that the right thing to do with a building she had bought for $600 was to give its contents back to the families they had once belonged to. Iris stood behind the long glass counter all morning. The thin gold ring on her left hand caught the slanting March light through the front window every time she lifted a coffee cup. Wade stood at her shoulder. Henry Eastman stood by the door, taking coats the way his father had taken coats for 42 years. The cardboard sign read, "Open." Outside, on the iron Coldwater street lamp directly in front of the shop, the first robin of the year sat in the bare branches of the maple tree and watched the doorway. Inside, Iris Whitfield, 69 years and 365 days old, evicted at 69, widowed at 67, who had walked away from her wedding ring on a Tuesday morning in November of 2008 and been walking back to it slowly ever since, lifted her left hand to her mouth and kissed the small, deep blue sapphire, and whispered to her husband, 2 states and 1 heaven away, the only word she had left that meant everything she needed it to mean. Home.